Hello and welcome to episode 416 of the Mark and Me podcast. As always, I'm your host Mark. Now joining me on today's episode is Anthony Raneri from the awesome band Bayside. It's quite good actually because only a few days ago you had another Anthony, and that was Anthony Green from LS Dunes. So I haven't done an episode for about 3 weeks and now you've had two literally in the space of 3 days. So it's really great. Bayside are an absolutely awesome band, and if you're in the UK and you're listening to this podcast, there's still a few dates of their UK tour going on right now, and I urge you all to go and buy a ticket because this band are absolutely awesome. And on today's interview we get to sit down and talk all about the band's legacy, the rise, everything they've gone through, and Anthony is so honest, so deep, and just a great guest, and that'll be coming up in just a couple of minutes time. But as always, I use the intro for every episode of Mark and Me to touch base and talk about my last episode. And LS Dunes, what an incredible band. Anthony Green was awesome. The episode blew up. I had so many fan accounts DMing me and saying it's one of their favourite interviews they've heard from LS Dunes. And honestly, their new album, which you should go and get right now, is absolutely awesome. So thanks again to everyone that tuned in and took the time to listen. But today it's all about Bayside, and I want to get straight to the interview. So here's me and Anthony talking all things music. So welcome to the Mark and Me podcast.
I'm happy to be here.
What I love to do on every episode of Mark and Me, and I've never changed this even since launching over 8 years ago, is I always like, with every guest that comes on, to take it right back to the very start. So we are going to go on a little trip down memory lane today, and I want to take it back to when you were a kid and you kind of had those early albums that you probably listen to still today or shape the kind of bands that you listen to today. And I'm wondering, as a kid, do you remember that first album that maybe you were given or had bought with your own pocket money?
I do. I could really think of two particular ones. I mean, the first album that I can remember falling in love with was Meet the Beatles.
Oh,
that's
amazing.
The first time my parents used to play music around the house a lot, and their friends, and we'd get together with family friends, and I would be hanging out with the other kids, and everybody wanted to play sports or video games or kind of whatever, and the parents would always have their music on that they liked. And I remember noticing that I liked particularly the Beatles. I Want to Hold Your Hand. I could hone it in even to a song. I Want to Hold Your Hand. I knew that I liked it more than everyone else. Everyone else was sort of bothered. All the other kids my age I was probably about 6, 7, 8. All the other kids were bothered by their parents' old people music being on. And I just remember the melodies kind of like speaking to me and making me feel something that I recognized that the other kids weren't feeling. Yeah, that's the first thing I can remember. And then the first record I bought with my own money was Nirvana, Nevermind. I saved up money that I was making, and I bought Nevermind on cassette. That was the first album I bought with my own money.
That's quite spooky. So I think I'm 42 years old, so I think we're in the same boat here. And when I picked up an acoustic guitar, the first song I ever learned to play was Polly off Nevermind, because it was just 4 simple power chords.
Yeah.
It was like, wow, this is exactly. I never realized, like, at that age, your idol is Kurt Cobain. You're thinking you're never ever going to be able to do anything that he does. He's like a god.
Sure.
I saw him as this absolute, out of touch, just god. And then I couldn't believe that when I got to play along with, Nevermind and songs like Polly or Lithium, I couldn't believe that I could actually do what he was doing. So I think we're very similar, because I had the cassette. I remember being blown away, and the moment I heard that whole album, I was like, I just want everything that Nirvana have ever done. And then obviously we had the tragedy of Kurt leaving us, but then to see the Unplugged set and be able to play along, it gave me hope that maybe one day I could be like Nirvana or be like Kurt, and hopefully, be able to write songs and play songs. I feel like we're on the same page already.
Yeah, I'm also 42, so I think we got into the same thing around the same time. And the first song I learned when I was taking guitar lessons as a kid was In Bloom.
Oh,
that was
amazing.
the first one I learned. So, but what's funny about that is that, it's funny you say how you look up to this band and you don't realize that what they're doing is actually, you can replicate it, right? Because it really was like kind of simple songwriting, simple musicianship, but just gorgeous songs. And you learn that. And then somewhere along the way, I feel like when you start writing your own songs and as you progress as a songwriter, you veer away from that. And then with maturity, you refine it. With maturity as a songwriter, you refine that things don't have to be complicated. You remember somehow that Nirvana and the Beatles and stuff like this wasn't musically complicated. It's funny. You kind of go away from the simplicity, and then with maturity, you refine it.
Exactly that. And, my music tastes then kind of evolved, and I wanted to hear, as bands progress, I wanted to hear, I don't know, I'm thinking off the top of my head, but I'd listen to Pantera and hear Dimebag Darrell's guitar, and I'd be like, oh my God, like this is really technical, and this is a whole level above Nirvana. And then, I'd even go further and, Deftones and do the new metal era, so Korn, Limp Bizkit, and all that, Wes Borland and guitarists like that. I would be blown away by what they were doing. But you're right. As I got older, I realized sometimes less is more. And then I'd go back to my roots and hear the early Nirvana records, or even bands like Bush and Everclear, and realize that sometimes you don't need all that. You just need the simple art of a good song and good structure, and just realize that it's true. Less is more sometimes.
Yeah, good melodies, good lyrics, a nice chord progression. And I mean, that's timeless, and if you can embellish it without veering away from those bones, like, then great, but a lot of times when you're a young songwriter, especially, you really overcomplicate things, and you kind of forget that, the first punk band that a lot of people listen to was like Green Day, and that was really simple stuff, so it's funny, you forget that stuff that you fell in love with, the stuff that made you fall in love with music to begin with, more often than not is going to be a simpler thing. A lot of people, their entrance to music is pop music, so, and that stuff is simply written, so you kind of forget that that's really what made you fall in love with music to begin with. And, like I said, if you mature enough as a writer, you find it again.
You mentioned Green Day there, and it nicely links to my next question. So I was lucky enough that at 42, the same age as you, one of my first ever gigs was Green Day on their Dookie tour. In the
Cool.
UK, my parents dropped me off. It was like, you go to the gig, you meet us back here, you don't talk to anyone. I was, I was really young. I was like
Right.
school the next day, but I went in and saw Billy Joe Armstrong on guitar. As a three piece back then, they had no extra session musicians or evolved into the band they are now. It was really just the three of them. And I had this moment when watching them. I think, When I Come Around and songs like Longview and She and Basket Case, I just thought, that is what I want to do. The hairs on my neck were sticking up, my rib cage was shaking as I could hear the bass, and I just thought, that is all I want to do for the rest of my life. And I wondered what your introduction to live music was. We talked about Nirvana Nevermind on cassette, but I'm sure you never got to see Nirvana at that age. I wondered what your kind of introduction to the live scene was.
It's funny. My real introduction to the live scene, I grew up in Queens, New York, which is right next to Long Island.
Yeah.
And I was actually I was about 20 minutes from Manhattan and about 5 minutes from Long Island. So I really kind of started going to shows when I was a teenager, is when we started having this really great underground, like, punk and hardcore scene on Long Island. So I started going to see bands like one of my first shows. I saw Glassjaw play in a high school cafeteria. The high school that Darrell, the singer, was actually, he was still in high school. He was attending the school,
Oh
and
my
they played
God.
a show in the cafeteria. That's one of the first shows. There was a band called Silent Majority in Long Island that was really influential on us and Taking Back Sunday and Glassjaw and Brand New and The Movie Life. And Nick, our bass player, actually was in Silent Majority. We were like, kids. So I kind of started going to like hardcore shows and like local hardcore and local punk shows, but they were local shows to us, but these bands wound up like kind of going all over the place. A local show to us at the time was like Taking Back Sunday or Glassjaw, you know. So I started there, and then I started going into the city to see kind of the Fat Records bands. I would go to a club. I saw Bad Religion at CBGB's when I was like in the 10th grade. And I would go see Lagwagon, Strung Out, like those kinds of bands. So I kind of really, my first introduction, I didn't go to like a bigger show until much later. It was kind of punk shows and hardcore shows for me was my first exposure to live music.
It blows my mind you saw Glassjaw in like a school cafeteria when you know, if I listen to bands now and I still think of the albums that literally changed my life, Worship and Tribute for me is just absolutely textbook, and Daryl's songwriting and vocals are just, it's genuinely a masterpiece of music, and I can't believe that you saw this in a school.
Well, it's crazy because I mean, I really can attribute like a lot of where my life has gone to the proximity to that stuff, because I remember being in bands when I was little, you know, junior high school. So 6th grade, you know, 11 years old, 12 years old, and just thinking, and my idea of music was Green Day and Nirvana and the Red Hot Chili Peppers and stuff like that. And those were just super famous rock stars, you know, and it seemed completely impossible to ever get there. And then Glassjaw and The Movie Life and these bands that were like peers of mine started going on tour. And I was like, well, if they can go on tour, I mean, I guess I can go on, you know what I mean? It became like something you could do, because like these guys that we used to skateboard with or used to hang out at the mall with, they were going on tour. And I was like, well, and they were getting record deals. Saves the Day. I remember when I was in high school, we knew the Saves the Day guys, and they got a record deal, and Taking Back Sunday signed to Victory. And these guys were all going on tour. And I remember then seeing like the Get Up Kids on MTV, and thinking like, thinking it all became so attainable, you know, and I don't know that I ever would have like really dove in to the deep end of like a life in music if I wasn't seeing like peers doing it, you know?
With your own kind of experience and looking back, obviously it's really hard to remember the days specifically, but was there a moment that you remember that gave you the confidence, or was a spark in your mind that made you think, I want to do this? Like, you've seen these incredible bands around you, even from your school days, but was there a moment that you had that confidence inside that was like, I want to do this? Because a lot of the bands I speak to obviously get in covers bands or do the whole Battle of the Bands thing at school, but I didn't know if your journey was the same as that.
No, I was playing in bands when I was young. So, you know, one thing to remember is that I've been in Bayside since I was 17.
Yeah.
So
that's mind-blowing.
I've been in Bayside longer than I wasn't in Bayside. So I've been in the band for 25 years, and I was only not in the band for 17 or 16. So it, like, all of my memories outside of childhood memories are that I was in Bayside. So I didn't have, I was playing like in legitimately like little kid bands until I was in high school when I started Bayside, and we started touring within like maybe 3 months of starting the band. So it was always this. So I was playing in bands with friends, you know, that I grew up with, and we would play little shows in VFW halls and in school cafeterias. And I played a lot of my first shows. There was a public library that used to put on shows. I played a lot of shows there, and all my friends kind of wanted to, my close friend group that I was playing with, they all wanted to like do other stuff, you know, and rightfully so. We were like 16 years old, you know, so they wanted to skateboard, or some of them were really focused on school. They wanted to play sports. They wanted to just hang out and do nothing, you know, which is completely understandable for a 16-year-old. But I knew like I wanted to really be in a band at that point, like 16, 17 years old. I knew I wanted to do this. So I started going on message boards. This is like early internet. This is like AOL chat rooms at the time. So I started going into chat rooms and onto message boards and looking for people who wanted to be in a band that was going to like go on tour and really, really do it. So when I first started Bayside, it was me and three guys that I didn't know. I met on message boards that were in a similar position, that were playing in local bands that couldn't get people who really wanted to fully commit. So the four of us just said, I want to do this for real. So we started a band. And when we started the band, it was meant to go the distance. Like from day one, it was like, we're going on tour. I think we played 2 local shows and our third show was out of state. Like we traveled for our third show and we booked a tour within like 3 months of being a band. So we knew we were going to like do it that way. And that, yeah, no, I was only 17 and I had done merch. When I was 16, I went on tour doing merch for Brand New and doing merch for a band called The Strider, who was on Equal Vision, that all like guys that I had grown up with. So, I had the path kind of in my mind's eye already.
I like the unique story that it was such a short amount of time until you were already on your tour and already playing shows, when sometimes you hear bands take 4 or 5 years to do their first EP and get comfortable and confident, and it's great that it happened quite soon for you. And I wondered, I never in the time we've got to record a podcast today could I cover the whole 25 years of the band, but what I'm really intrigued by is, were you able to take a step back even in the early days and see the progression that your band were making, that each time you played a different show right from the start, you saw more people coming? If you played a festival, you saw your name going up the bill as the years went on. You could see, actually, we're not the first band on this week, and this time around I can see people in the crowd with our t-shirts on and people are singing the songs back to us. Could you see that kind of progression, or were you too incorporated in it? Were you too kind of stuck in it as a band member to even have the time to reflect? Or was it great to actually take a step back every now and then and a snapshot and think, fuck yeah, like this is really good progress?
No, that happened in like probably year 22.
Wow.
is when I stepped back. I mean, there were moments where we were like talking about tours. I never really noticed the shows getting bigger. Bayside's progression has been very slow and steady. It's been, there really was never an inciting incident. There wasn't a record that blew up the band. There wasn't a song. There wasn't like a big single that all of a sudden was on the radio or on TV. There wasn't a support tour that we did that, after that we were bigger. It was always just slow and steady, so that certainly made it hard to ever realize like, wow, there's twice as many people as the last time we were here. But also I think I was just so tunnel visioned to like that, like I just wanted to go. I just wanted the show to be better. I wanted our songs to be better. That's all I ever cared about. And I would say that the moment, it was never so much how many people were at the shows as when we started offering support slots to like bands that I grew up listening to. And that's when it was like, wow, I am who I wanted to be. You know what I mean? It wasn't until then that, when that happens, it's like, wow, that is pretty cool, or playing, maybe the first time I played a venue that I went to go see bands that I considered huge. Things like that, there are moments, but it was never like, wow, we made it. It wasn't until like maybe the 22 years or so into being a band that I was like, if I could just stay here forever, I think I would be happy with that. And that's sort of where I am now too. Where I'm like, this is a pretty cool life. And if I could just do this, like until my body refuses to let me do it anymore, then that'd be a pretty good life.
I've had some great opportunities to have some of my favorite bands on this podcast, and bands like Deftones, Incubus, Feeder, Everclear, bands that have been in the industry for over 20 years and approaching sometimes 30 years. And I wondered, especially with yourself, who's now celebrating 25 years, what it is that keeps it going for you, what it is that keeps giving you that adrenaline and that desire every morning to wake up and want to keep on doing it. Because some of my favorite bands at the drive-in, Refused, they fizzle out and we don't get to see them carry on doing what they do best, and something takes over that wants them to eventually, put the guitar down and not do what they do. And I wondered what it was with yourself personally and Bayside that, you still sound like you've got the hunger that you may have had 25 years ago. You still have this passion, and that's something that isn't fake or put on. You can see it's sincere, and I just wondered what it's like to be celebrating this milestone, but probably still excited by the next 20 years ahead.
Well, I love playing,
Yeah.
I love writing and I love singing and I love getting on stage. I love all of that. And I think most people who do this do, but I think but more so than that, I think to put a finer point on it, I love Bayside.
Yeah.
Bayside's my favorite band. I don't get tired of it. I mean, there are songs that I've played literally thousands of times on records that are 20 plus years old that I do not get tired. It's still, we've been closing our shows with Devotion and Desire, which came out 20 years ago. We've been closing every show with that for 20 years. And every time we get to that point in the set, I get so excited to play it.
That's awesome to hear. I love the fact that your favorite band is your own band. Like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
The fact is you don't get bored of your own stuff,
I can't speak for other bands that fizzle out or get tired of it or decide that they don't want to do it anymore. But I know for me, Bayside, our sound hasn't changed much in 25 years. We want to always sound like Bayside. And that happens a lot with bands around us or bands that I grew up listening to, where they kind of stop sounding like the band you fell in love with. And I think that that's a big part of our slow and steady growth. Every tour we do is the biggest tour we've ever done.
Yeah.
So we're still growing. People still like our new music. We're still making new fans. When we go to the UK in a few weeks, that will be our biggest UK tour that we've ever done. And 25 years in, when we, the last Bayside tour in the States was the biggest tour we've ever done, so we're still growing. And I think that has a lot to do with that. We still sound like Bayside, we don't lose fans ever. Cause we still sound like Bayside, and we're able to do that because I'm still so excited to write a new Bayside record. I think, there were times, especially early in kind of the emo and in punk scene, where you listen to a band that you loved the first couple of records, and then it's like, okay, they discovered Pet Sounds, and now they want to sound like that, And so for me, I like to, and I think Pet Sounds is like the record too. I'm not going to name any names, but I could think of specific bands where it's like, yeah, Pet Sounds. They listen to Pet Sounds, now, or like Queen or whatever it is, And I love all that stuff, and I find ways to put my influences into Bayside. And I hate to say that like we've made a box for Bayside, but for me, sometimes I write a song and I think it's a good song, and I'm like, yeah, but it's not Bayside. It doesn't sound like Bayside, and like maybe I can do X, Y, and Z to turn it into a Bayside song, or maybe like this song just goes on the shelf for a while, or because it's got to be a Bayside song, even if it's good. It's got to be like, if it's not a Bayside song, then it can't go on the record.
That kind of works two ways, doesn't it? Because so my favorite bands are Thrice, and I love the way they've evolved, and I love the way that they still sound like Thrice. They've evolved, don't get me wrong. They've added different guitars, and the dynamics have changed, and vocals from Dustin has changed over time. But if I put them on the radio or I listen to them on record, I still know it's a Thrice record, even from the debut until their most recent album. And I feel like you're in the same category. You're never playing the same songs you wrote 25 years ago, but you have evolved as a songwriter. You've progressed as musicians. You've definitely evolved as a band, but you still know it's a Bayside record. Where on the opposite side, a band that have been so successful like Radiohead, who sound nothing like themselves, even on each album as they've evolved. In Rainbows doesn't sound anything like the Bends, but I think they must have...
Yeah, and they've pulled that off.
I know.
There are people who pull it off, but you're rolling the dice for sure with that. When bands do that, I think Deftones is a great example of a band that still definitely sounds like Deftones. It's obviously the same band that it was, but they've grown and they keep it fresh somehow.
So with yourself, and you always writing a song and making sure it fits within the box of Bayside, does it feel not frustrating, but does it feel strange if you write a really good song and you're really happy and you've got this buzz, but at the end of it you're like, I need to throw that away? Like, that doesn't even make the director's cut. That doesn't even make the cutting table of maybe a future song for Bayside. It kind of just I don't know, disappears because you got to make sure it fits within a certain criteria.
Yeah, absolutely. I throw away tons of songs. I mean, like I said, there are songs that don't sound like Bayside, so they can't be Bayside songs. And then there are songs that are Bayside songs, but they're just too kind of, down the middle, too, like not interesting. It's not fresh. It sounds like something Bayside would have written 20 years ago. So it's hard to write a Bayside song because it's got to be this and it's got to be that and it's got to be this and it's got to be that. It's got to be a lot of things. So it takes us years to write a record. I don't know when we'll go in the studio again, but I'm already writing. It takes me years to write a record because it is hard. It's more than writing 10 or 12 good songs. It's writing 10 or 12 good Bayside songs that are fresh, but also sound like Bayside.
Have you ever, I'm just trying to explore a bit more, but have you ever got into the studio as a band, shared it with the rest of the band, you're all happy, it's a Bayside song, you started recording, you're listening back with the engineer and the producer, and it actually is at that point you realize it isn't actually the song you thought it was, and then it gets scrapped? Or does it never get to that point?
It happens rarely because I self-edit pretty critically, so a lot of times the band will never hear the song. Probably half of everything I write, the band never even hears. I don't even think it's good enough to play for anybody.
Wow.
And then the band will edit, the band will hear things that I'm working on, and if they don't love it, then it goes away. But you do hear stuff in the studio because if you love something, then you have, at the end of the day, we do want to entertain the audience. It's got to be something the song has to be something that we love and that the audience is going to love. If we love it, I think to be a really great songwriter, you need to be able to remove yourself from the song and remove the passion and the emotion that went into it and sort of take your writer's hat on and try to hear it the way somebody who has no attachment to it is going to hear it. And that happens, I'm sure every artist that you speak to will say that they hear some of their old work or look at some of their old work and they can pick a few things they would have done differently, so you want to try to get to that point before it comes out where you are editing and you're critiquing to the point where you're like, okay, now that I'm far and now that I've zoomed out enough on this, I get bored when I hear this part. Like at this part, when I get to this point in the song, I'm bored now that I'm not like emotionally invested in it anymore.
Wow. Yeah. I love the kind of openness and honesty from you there, that you can literally write a song and even yourself, you're so probably critical of your own work that you won't even share it with your bandmates unless you know it's a certain level of kind of, I suppose you're a bit of a perfectionist, and there must be songs that may have been thrown away that could have been your biggest hits, but they weren't enough to pass your own test.
Absolutely. I mean, but part of the test is that I have to love it and the rest of the band has to love it. And it's something that we think the fans will love. So we never put out something that we think could be big if we don't
Yeah.
love it. And we try not to put out anything that we think is good, but we don't think other people are going to understand. That is something that young songwriters, I think, struggle with and don't know they struggle with, is the emotional attachment to something. If you write a 2-minute intro, 2-minute instrumental intro, it might be exciting to you. You might think it's the most brilliant thing in the world, but you really need to be able to zoom out and think about how somebody who didn't write it, how they are going to think it looks or sounds or whatever.
That's great advice to anyone that's listening today that's in a band that might be writing their first EP or album, because you've got to kind of sometimes put yourself in other people's shoes. And I think a lot of bands are too kind of tied down in their own shoes and don't realize that there are other perspectives apart from their own. And I say that with full respect,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you don't think of it because we think of ourselves as artists, and we are. Absolutely. We're 100% artists. And that's why I say it's got to be something I love and that they love. And that's much harder to do than something you love. Anybody could come up with something that they love. You know what I mean? But if you want to get out of the bedroom and play in front of people, then you really need to think broader than that, and it's harder to do. It's like I said, it's easy to write something that you think is good. But like, can you write something that you think is good and that a bunch of other people will think is good? That's the hard part.
You mentioned on today's episode that after 25 years, you're playing your biggest shows ever in America. And as we're sat here, we're only a month away from you coming back to the UK. Some incredible venues: Nottingham Rescue Rooms, Birmingham O2 Academy number 2, some absolutely brilliant venues, and your biggest tour yet. And I wondered, even after 25 years of touring and doing what you do, and kind of all that you know is Bayside because it's your first proper band and it's all you've done, do you still, ahead of these dates, get nervous? Do you still think, when you look at the poster and see sold out and low tickets and, really big venues, do you think to yourself, like, oh my God, I've got to do what we do? Or can you switch on the motions?
Funny. The more people there are going to be at a show, the less nervous I am, because the bigger a crowd is, the more it doesn't seem like people anymore. The more it just seems like white noise.
Yeah.
Because you can't really make anybody out anymore. Like, I've never sang karaoke in my life. The idea of karaoke, the idea of getting up in a bar in front of like 10 people who are staring at you terrifies me. But like, we've played, in arenas and stadiums and festivals of like upwards of 50,000 people at a time. And that's not, it becomes not real anymore. You don't think of it as 50,000 people. It's just sort of like a picture. It's like you're looking out at a picture of a crowd. It doesn't feel real.
Yeah.
It's easier for me. The bigger the crowd, the easier it is.
Yeah, I suppose that's a good way to look at it. And I suppose the more people that sing back and the more faces there, it's less to focus on. It's more about, like you said, a karaoke would probably terrify you with just a couple of people watching.
I mean, I couldn't imagine if somebody just handed me, if somebody I didn't know handed me a guitar and sat next to me on a couch and said, just play me a song. That's a nightmare. That's like a nightmare,
I'm making a note here that if I ever meet you, I won't bring an acoustic guitar. We'll just have a beer or something.
Yeah, like playing in like a coffee shop or open mic night is terrifying.
Yeah.
Terrifying. Play like an open mic night is terrifying. But like, if there's 50,000 people, it's like, that doesn't even look like people anymore. It just looks like a sea, it looks like an ocean. It's not, you don't even think of it as like a bunch of people judging you.
Obviously, I'm conscious of time, and I know that there's more press to do after today. But what I love to do on the podcast, and I do it with every episode and every guest, and I've never changed this now for over 400 episodes, is I like the guests to have a moment at the end of the podcast to choose their song that means a lot to them. And I'm not talking about a Bayside song. I'm talking about a song that means a lot to you. And the reason I ask this question is, when I edit today's interview and put it out there for the world to listen to, every single guest that's been on Mark and Me chooses their own personal song to be the outro music to the episode, so it keeps it quite fresh. It keeps the podcast quite original. And I am going to put you on the spot, and I know it's a question that musicians want probably weeks to think about, but is there a song that comes to your heart and your soul that when I ask you the question today that you instantly becomes the song that kind of came in your head first? Because there's usually a reason why that song came above all the others, or at the moment, if you got kind of 1,000 in your head that you're trying to whittle down.
The first thing that comes to my mind, and it's there are songs that are very important to me that I didn't write that I'm really passionate about. There's a lot of music that makes me cry.
Yeah.
There's instrumental music that makes me cry. There are melodies that I think are so beautiful that it moves me. But the first thing that comes to mind is Devotion and Desire, the Bayside song, because like that song truly changed my life. In some ways, like I support my family, I feed my children, I clothe my children, and like that, that song was sort of a turning point in our career, and to this day it's our most popular song. So I mean, that's a really life-changing song. And the lyrics, it's a song I wrote after a breakup. A breakup a long time ago, a person whose last name I can't even remember as we sit here right now.
Yeah.
So the lyrics of the song don't resonate with me the same, but the impact that song has had on my life, I mean, I don't know that I could overstate it.
That's perfect. And I think it's a really nice closing point to today's interview, and especially like a full circle moment of a celebration of 25 years of the band. And I'm really excited by the next kind of couple of months ahead. Obviously, each night you're performing 2 sets, which is going to be amazing. So fans of yours that will be going to these shows in the UK have a treat really every single night. I think it's going to be a really great, humbling moment for you as a band. And I'm really excited, and I really can't wait to see the kind of big crowds cheering and kind of celebrating with you at this incredible milestone that not many bands get to celebrate.
Yeah, I'm excited, and, to go back to sort of what you said about, like, when we were talking about, like, waking up and smelling the roses, kind of like recognizing sort of the progress, it's hard to do because these are our biggest shows in the UK. And that's all I think about is that forward progress. It's like after 25 years, these are going to be our biggest shows. People are going to be there. They're going to be excited. They're going to be celebrating our entire catalog, our whole history, which is so cool. At the same time, the shows are a fraction of the size of the shows that we play in the US.
Yeah.
But that doesn't matter because they're bigger than the last time we went to the UK, and there's going to be a bunch of people in the room celebrating our catalog, people who have been with us from the beginning, who want to come and hear. The whole point of this tour, the UK leg and the US leg, is to play old stuff and new stuff. It's like career spanning, with the 2 sets. The one set is the songs from our first 4 albums, and the second set is songs from our second 5 albums. So the fact that it's people who have been with us from the beginning, people who are still following the band after 25 years, and like I said, more people than the last time we were there, that's all that matters. You just keep your head down and just keep playing because it's fun.
It's amazing. And you are playing quite local to me. You're playing the night before Valentine's Day in Birmingham. So I really hope I can kind of get some time off work, get down there, hopefully see you and celebrate with you. Because I think it's going to be it's at Birmingham O2 Academy #2, and it's a great venue. The sound's great, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to meet you. I hope you can make it out.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what I do want to say is I'm really grateful for your time. I understand how busy things are, and life is absolutely chaotic right now, especially at the start of the year. But I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and I wish you all the luck with the UK tour, with the US leg, with everything that's coming up. And even though you're 25 years in, I genuinely, hand on heart, feel like we'll be having a podcast in 10 years celebrating 35 years and talking about how the last decade's even been a bigger, more successful 10 years for you. And I feel like your journey, even though we're 25 years in, still isn't even at the halfway point.
There's no doubt in my mind, because if I wasn't delusional, then we wouldn't be talking about 25 years. So that those delusions of I'm going to do this forever and it's always going to get bigger, so far they keep coming true. So, nobody's ever made it thinking they weren't going to.
I love that, and it's really refreshing to hear, and I've really enjoyed today's chat, and I wish you all the luck with the rest of the press coming up, and I'll do all I can to be there in Birmingham and meet you in person, shake your hand, and celebrate this episode.
Cool. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
So there's my interview with me and Anthony from Bayside. What an incredible guest. What an amazing band. I took so much from this interview. I love his passion. I love the fact that after so many years, he's still got it. He still wants it more than ever. And there's no sign of him slowing down anytime soon. As I said at the start of today's podcast, Bayside are touring the UK right now. Go and get yourself a ticket. Go and check them out and you'll be not let down. It's going to be absolutely awesome. I want to say a massive thanks to Emma for making this interview happen, but you really are one of the reasons why Mark and Me is so successful, so thanks again for making this interview happen. Also, if you're listening to today's interview, why not share it? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, wherever you are, hit that button to share it. Loads of people love Bayside. They've been going so long, they have a huge fan base. If they see that graphic of the episode and Anthony's name, they'll click, they'll listen, and before you know, they might be listening to Mark and Me every week. So just take that moment to please share the episode. I do have a Patreon account. It's the only way I can keep paying to keep this podcast live. No money from Patreon actually goes into my pocket. It's all about just putting it back into the podcast, allowing the podcast to go on all these different directories that are out there, and allows me also to go out there and interview more guests, which means more podcasts for you guys at home. Before I go, let's give a shout out to the two sponsors of the podcast. Firstly, Richer Sounds. If you're in the market for anything to do with audio and visual, go on richersounds.com or visit any of their incredible high street stores. They won't be beaten on price and they really are the best people out there. And secondly, Vice Press. If you want some incredible collectibles, posters, prints, all licensed with the best artists in the country, go on vicepress.com, and if you're going to buy yourself something, use the discount code MarkandMe10 for 10% off that first order. You'll want to buy everything on their site. There's so much cool stuff, and thanks to Richer Sounds and Vice Press for sponsoring Mark and Me each and every week. I'll be back in a couple of days' time with another brand new episode. You had nothing for a couple of weeks and now you're getting it back as normal. So thanks for today. I hope you've all enjoyed the interview. Go and listen to Bayside, look after yourself, and I'll speak to you all in a few days' time.
Trying to create something that's not there. Spark a saw as a bomb is just a means to an end. And I was just so happy to be out of my shell again. But don't think that I really cared for who it was. So for now I'll just have to keep it shut. You're not